I'm Margot Politis. Welcome to Study English IELTS preparation. Today we're going to talk about the IELTS speaking and reading tests. The speaking test includes an interview where you can be asked to talk about yourself, your family, your job, or maybe your studies. But you won't have to answer any questions today. Instead, we're going to interview a man called Perry Vlahos. He's an astronomer. By asking Perry a series of questions, we can learn a bit more about what makes a good response. Let's begin by asking Perry a typical Part 1 type question. Perry, can you tell us about yourself?
Well, currently I'm the Vice President of the Astronomical Society of Victoria. Another thing I do is the tours at Melbourne Observatory, where a lot of people come in to get a look through the telescopes and have been there for a long time, very historical instruments in some cases.
Perry answered the question very well. He gave detail in his answer. He's the Vice President of the Astronomical Society of Victoria, and he does tours at the Melbourne Observatory. Perry ordered points logically, and he used linking words like currently and another thing. Did you notice that he started his response with the word well? He did this so he could have some time to think about his answer. Sometimes people will use fillers like well, or are while they are thinking about what they want to say next. It's best to minimise fillers. Don't use them too often because it affects fluency. Fluency is an important feature of your spoken language that the examiner is listening for. What question would you ask Perry next? Perry is an astronomer. We might ask him about his area of study, astronomy. Perry, could you tell us about astronomy?
Astronomy is very much a cutting-edge science. It's the oldest science and it's also the newest science. And then every time we find out something new and interesting out there, it also tells us something new and interesting about ourselves and our place in the cosmos.
Perry used words that belong to the field of astronomy. For example, he talked about cutting-edge science and the cosmos. Perry also used opposites in his description. He described astronomy as being both the oldest science and the newest science. Perry didn't just tell us facts about astronomy, he extended the description to tell us his opinions about the effect that astronomy can have. He said that it can tell us something new and interesting about ourselves and our place in the cosmos. To enhance his response, Perry could have talked more about the cosmos. That would show more of his vocabulary range. So let's ask Perry, why did you choose to study astronomy?
When I was about 11 or 12 and had my first science lesson at high school, and the teacher went up to the board, drew a semicircle, put in various dots, labelled them, said, "Right, now copy this down into your books. These are stars, planets and constellations. Go out there and find them tonight. And then let me know how you went." It inspired me, fired my imagination and gave me something to work towards.
Perry answered this question by telling a story. He used narration. He began the story by telling us when it happened. That is, when I was 11 or 12. And he then told us where the story took place. That is, in my first science lesson at high school. The narrative follows a sequence of events. Perry used direct speech. He quoted exactly what the teacher said. The teacher said, "Right, now copy this down into your books." By quoting what the teacher said, his response is more interesting. By listening to Perry, we can get a few useful tips for the IELTS speaking test. Perry did a number of things that you should do in your IELTS test to give the examiner the best chance to hear you speaking clearly. It's a good idea to link ideas and language together and give interesting answers. You should also try to give details and answer questions fully. Remember how Perry told us that astronomy was both the oldest and also the newest science. Using these opposites was a good way for him to describe the field. It also allowed him to show that he was aware of the relationship between these words. Understanding the relationship between words can help to build your vocabulary. It will also help you to answer some questions in the IELTS reading test. Let's have a look at some word relations you should know. First, synonyms, words that mean the same. For example, for interesting, we have synonyms such as entertaining, fascinating, and intriguing. And for the word beautiful, we have gorgeous, handsome, lovely, and exquisite. You should also know about opposites. For example, high and low, big and small, anxious and calm, cheap and expensive. Another group of related words that can be useful to know is words related by degree. These are words we can put on a scale. For example, hot, warm, cool, and cold. Hot and cold can also be opposites. So can warm and cool. Now here's Perry talking about what it's like to look up at the stars with his telescopes. Listen for adjectives and adverbs as we ask, Perry, do you enjoy your work as an astronomer?
I imagine the closest that I come to a great spiritual experience is when I'm out there with my telescope, total darkness, and the universe above my head, and you feel this strong connection between all of those elements. And that really fires me, and I'm always looking for new things to see as well.
Perry uses a range of adjectives such as total darkness, strong connection, and new things. Can you think of any synonyms for these? How about absolute darkness, firm connection, and unfamiliar things? What about opposites? The opposite of strong connection is weak connection. The opposite of new things is old things. Perry also uses the adverb always. The opposite of always is never. We could also form a scale from always. Always, sometimes, occasionally, never. Knowing how words relate is useful when answering true, false, and not given questions in the IELTS reading test. But that's all for today. Let's review what we've learnt. First, we saw how Perry answered interview questions. We saw how linking ideas, using narrative, and giving detailed answers can be helpful. Then, we looked at word relationships. We saw that learning synonyms, opposites, and scales can help build vocabulary and also help in the IELTS reading test. Of course, all of these skills take practice. Make sure you visit the Study English website for more. It's at abcasiapacific.com/studyenglish. Bye-bye. Hello, I'm Margot Politis. Welcome to Study English IELTS preparation. Today we're going to look at how English users indicate negative meanings. One of the ways we can do that is with the word not. And we're going to meet a glass artist talk about his craft. The ancient art of hot glass blowing dates back 5,000 years to the Egyptians. Listen to Mark Douglas, the artist, talking about glass blowing today.
I think people are fascinated about glass in the sense, I know my grandmother had a beautiful glass vase on her dressing table or whatever. It was always, don't break the vase, it's this precious thing. The techniques I use for glass making aren't that dissimilar than what has been around for like centuries.
When English speakers want to give something a negative meaning, they use negative words such as not, she's not coming, no, there's no music, nobody, nobody saw the crash, nothing, there's nothing to eat, nowhere, he's nowhere to be seen. All these sentences have only one negative. When constructing negative sentences, English only allows one negative. Using two negative words, such as nobody and not, together in a sentence can give the opposite meaning to the one intended. So, for example, I did not see nobody. With this double negative, this literally means I saw somebody. However, watch Mark Douglas again and see how he uses a double negative to give a positive meaning.
The techniques I use for glass making aren't that dissimilar than what has been around for like centuries.
Mark says the techniques aren't dissimilar. Aren't is a contraction of are and not. So he uses the negative word form not. Dissimilar is made up of the negative prefix dis and the word similar. So he uses not and dis, both negatives, in one phrase. These cancel each other's effect, giving a positive meaning. Look what happens when we leave them both out. The techniques are not dissimilar. The techniques are similar. By saying the techniques are not dissimilar, he is drawing attention to the fact that this may be surprising and not what you might expect. He's saying that it's surprising that the techniques used today are similar to ancient techniques. This idea is reinforced by Mark using the negative word unchanged when talking about the techniques. Listen to how he uses unchanged.
So the basic techniques of gathering, blowing glass, putting a bubble into some glass, shaping it, pretty much have been unchanged for a long time.
Mark says the basic techniques of blowing glass have been unchanged for a long time. He does not say the techniques are the same. He chooses a negative to draw attention or emphasise that something has not changed. Let's try another example. The student was not unhappy with her test score. Cancel out the negatives, not and un, and you have the student was happy with her test score. The two negatives cancel each other out, leaving a positive statement. However, not unhappy is not the same as happy. The student may not have received an excellent score, but she didn't receive a bad one either. The student is not happy, but not unhappy either. So this sentence expresses a subtly different perspective and attitude than the simple positive statement, the student was happy. You can practice this construction by adding the prefix dis or un to many words. Not disloyal, not dishonest, not uncommon, not uncomfortable, not unkind. Before you know it, it will not be unusual for you to use negative expressions. In part 3 of the IELTS speaking test, you'll be discussing something linked to the topic you spoke about earlier in the interview. Let's focus on the features of a good response to part 3. You'll be expected to use more complex language because of the diverse tasks. You could be describing something, speculating, suggesting, stating an opinion, comparing, contrasting, or explaining. Let's imagine Mark Douglas is participating in the third part of the interview. Earlier, we heard Mark talking about glass blowing as an art form. As a follow-on question from part 2, the examiner could ask, for example, do you think some countries value glass art differently? Let's listen to how Mark answers this question.
I think Australians' perception of glass is a lot different than European or American. Like Europeans, because they've had Venetian glass around for a long time, they tend to appreciate how hard it is to make glass or the value of it. Australian people tend to look at whether it's mass-produced and then sit it next to a piece of art glass and can't really see the difference in it that much. Okay, it's not as if it's sort of money of it. I think it's just a psyche of collecting, which I don't think Australian people have that passion as much as European or American people.
In response to this type of question, you'd be expected to state your opinion about people's perception and appreciation of glass art. Did you notice the words he uses when giving his opinion? He says, I think Australians' perception of glass is a lot different. I think it's just a psyche of collecting. I don't think Australian people have that passion. Europeans tend to appreciate how hard it is. Australians tend to look at whether it's mass-produced. It's clear from his word choices that he is expressing his own views. You would also be expected to make comparisons like Mark does when he says, Australians' perceptions are a lot different than Europeans. It's important to vary your sentence structure. Mark uses a variety of sentence structures that are grammatically correct. He makes complex sentences, sentences that have more than one clause. He uses the subordinate conjunction because. I think Australians' perception of glass is a lot different than European because they've had Venetian glass around for a long time. He also uses the coordinate conjunction, or. They tend to appreciate how hard it is to make glass or the value of it. Mark's speech flows smoothly because he uses contractions. He says, they've had Venetian glass. It's mass-produced. Can't really see the difference. And it's just a psyche of collecting. How would you assess Mark's response to the question? I think his answer was relevant and effective. He demonstrated good grammatical range and accuracy. He spoke at a good pace and he used clear pronunciation. These are all goals you should aim for too. To find more information and tips for your IELTS test, just visit our website at abcasiapacific.com/studyenglish. That's all for today. I'll see you next time on Study English. Bye-bye. Hello, I'm Margot Politis. Welcome to Study English IELTS preparation. Today we'll practice using hyphens in words and talk about showing contrast using the words despite, although and but. But first we visit outback Australia and an isolated place called Maree. We'll see how the popularity of four-wheel drive cars has meant that a lot more people are travelling through the outback. And now they're even building luxury accommodation there.
685 kilometres north of Adelaide on the Oodnadatta track is Maree. When the Old Ghan Railway closed in the 1980s, it just about vanished off the map. But despite the isolation and the population dwindling to just 80, an out-of-towner is now making $1 million investment.
Condition, I think it'll be in demand.
Robin Taylor bought the 120-year-old pub 3 years ago and is about to build a 2-storey guest house next door. As well as a huge function room, it will have 14 luxury ensuite apartments and is costing $1.5 million.
Say it quickly, it's not too bad.
The driving force behind the boom is four-wheel drives.
Sometimes we join two or more words together to function as a single word or concept. We call these compound words. An example is father-in-law. Compound words can function as nouns, like father-in-law, or they can be adjectives. Here's a clip about the isolated town Maree. See if you can spot the compound words.
But despite the isolation and the population dwindling to just 80, an out-of-towner is now making $1 million investment.
She says out-of-towner and $1 million investment. Here, out-of-towner functions as a noun, a person who is from out of town. When writing compound words, we use hyphens. In the phrase $1 million investment, the compound $1 million functions as an adjective. It means that the investment will cost $1 million. When you write $1 million, the word dollars is a noun. The S is needed to show a plural number. In English, adjectives don't show number, so the S drops from dollar. We just say $1 million investment, not $1 million investment. When the phrase $1 million becomes an adjective, it needs to have a hyphen added. $1 million, $1 million investment. $1 million with a hyphen is a compound word. Let's listen for another example.
Robin Taylor bought the 120-year-old pub 3 years ago and is about to build a 2-storey guest house next door.
She talks about the 120-year-old pub. The pub is 120 years old. Notice that the phrase doesn't use hyphens and years has an S. But when we turn it into a phrase, it becomes a 120-year-old pub with hyphens and with the S gone. She also refers to a 2-storey guest house. The guest house has 2 stories. It's a 2-storey guest house. Let's listen to a description of the guest house.
As well as a huge function room, it will have 14 luxury ensuite apartments and is costing $1.5 million.
She says the guest house will have 14 luxury ensuite apartments and is costing $1.5 million. We don't use any hyphens with these groups of words because they don't make up a compound concept. Apartments is the noun, and 14, luxury, and ensuite are the qualifiers. This is a noun phrase. We could rewrite this information to use hyphens. We could form a single concept from $1.5 million. The guest house will have 14 luxury $1.5 million ensuite apartments. Then the physical description would be a single concept. We would join $1.5 million with hyphens. It's important to remember that compound adjectives, like all adjectives, cannot have a plural form. This is important when describing complex data, like in Task 1 of the IELTS writing test. The town in today's story is called Maree. Maree is a very isolated town, but something unexpected is happening there. Although the town is very small and far from the city, someone is prepared to invest a lot of money there.
But despite the isolation and the population dwindling to just 80, an out-of-towner is now making $1 million investment.
Despite the isolation and the population dwindling to 80, an out-of-towner is making $1 million investment. She uses the preposition despite. She could also have used the word although. Despite and although have the same meaning. They show contrast with unexpected results. Let's try an exercise. Here are 2 sentences. Margaret's marks were low. She managed to get into law school. How would you join these sentences together using but, despite, or although? Let's start with but. Margaret's marks were low, but she managed to get into law school. Now let's use although. Although Margaret's marks were low, she managed to get into law school. We can also join the sentences using despite. Despite having low marks, Margaret managed to get into law school. Despite can be followed by a noun. We can say, despite the isolation, or despite the fact I had a cold. Or it can be followed by a verb. When it's followed by a verb, we use the participle form. For example, despite being isolated, or despite having a cold. Let's finish with one final exercise. Take a look at these 2 sentences. There was noise outside all night. I managed to sleep. How would you join them using the word but? There was noise outside all night, but I managed to sleep. Now look at the 2 sentences again. How would you join them using although? Although there was noise outside all night, I managed to sleep. And finally, how would you join these 2 sentences using despite? Despite the noise outside all night, I managed to sleep. Using the words despite and although effectively will help improve your spoken and written English. And that's all for Study English today. Let's have a look back at the things we've talked about. First, we looked at using hyphens to create compound words. Then, we looked at using but, although, and despite to join sentences. And despite the fact that Study English has finished for today, you can continue to practice your English skills. Just visit our website for more information and IELTS tips. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Hello, I'm Margot Politis. Welcome to Study English IELTS preparation. Today we visit a zoo and we meet a man who designs natural-looking habitats for zoo animals to live in. We'll also talk about infinitive verbs and we'll listen out for some common conversation markers. But let's start by meeting Richard Rowe, a horticulturalist at Werribee Zoo in Victoria. Listen to Richard talk about his work at the zoo.
My role is to create environments that allow animals to display natural behaviour and for visitors to see animals in areas which really do appear to be very natural. The skill of what we do is to create something which looks as though it's been here for a long time and looks very natural. Well, we originally look at where is it that the animal is. So narrow it down to geography. Is it Africa, South America, wherever? Then look at the particular type of habitat. So is it riverine? Is it savanna? And then narrow it down even closer again. Often it's very, very difficult to get vegetation from the specific area that an animal comes from. With some plants, you know, they're already in the country, so you can take cuttings or collect seed. Botanic gardens are a great source for rare and unusual plants.
The simplest form of the verb is the infinitive form. If you're using a dictionary to find the meaning of a verb, you'll need to know the infinitive form. It's the most basic form that's used for dictionary entries. Infinitives are generally used with the marker to. They can be used in many different ways. Here's Richard describing his job.
My role is to create environments that allow animals to display natural behaviour and for visitors to see animals in areas which really do appear to be very natural.
Richard says to create, to display, to see, to be. These infinitives all function in different ways. Richard says, my role is to create environments. He also says, the skill is to create something. In both examples, the infinitive is a complement following the main verb. Take a look at this sentence. Before the IELTS test, the important thing is to get plenty of rest. Here, the infinitive to get is a complement following the main verb is. Let's look at another use of infinitives. Richard says, the areas appear to be very natural. In English, there is a set of verbs that can be followed by infinitives. Appear is one example. Other examples are afford. I can't afford to go to university. Begin. I can't begin to explain how sorry I am. Expect. I expect to get my visa next week. To use these correctly, you should learn the list of verbs taking the infinitive. Now, let's look at the third way Richard uses infinitives. He says, zoos allow animals to display natural behaviour, and they allow visitors to see animals. In English, there is a group of verbs that can be followed by an object and an infinitive. Allow is one example. You could write, her parents wouldn't allow her to stay out late. Some other examples are, ask. The professor asked him to explain the answer. And encourage. Encourage the IELTS students to do more practice tests. Here's a quick exercise for practicing infinitives. Here is a list of verbs. We have join, look, submit, edit, lend, and buy. I'm going to show you a sentence with one missing verb. You'll need to work out the right verb and the right construction to fill in the space. Let's start with an easy one. I forgot some bread. Do you know which verb will fill the gap? The completed sentence is, I forgot to buy some bread. Here's another one. We're going out for dinner. Would you like us? We're going out for dinner. Would you like to join us? How about this one? The teacher reminded the students their assignments on time. The teacher reminded the students to submit their assignments on time. In spoken English, there are a number of words we use to help manage our speech. These words make it easier to keep our speech fluent. They are called conversation management markers, but we often just call them fillers. Listen to Richard again. This time he's talking about how he designs a habitat for a specific animal in his zoo.
My role is to create environments that allow animals to display natural behaviour and for visitors to see animals in areas which really do appear to be very natural. The skill of what we do is to create something which looks as though it's been here for a long time and looks very natural. Well, we originally look at where is it that the animal is. So narrow it down to geography. Is it Africa, South America, wherever? Then look at the particular type of habitat. So is it riverine? Is it savanna? And then narrow it down even closer again. Often it's very, very difficult to get vegetation from the specific area that an animal comes from. With some plants, you know, they're already in the country, so you can take cuttings or collect seed. Botanic gardens are a great source for rare and unusual plants.
Did you notice where Richard used the words well, so, and you know? It's important to understand how and why these words are used. Let's take a closer look at each one. We use the word well to indicate that we are considering or thinking about what someone has said. Richard uses well to begin his response to a question. He's about to take up the topic, so he's thinking about what to say.
Well, we originally look at where is it that the animal is.
Next, Richard uses the words you know. We use the phrase you know to create a sense of intimacy by asking the listener to agree or show that they understand. Richard says, you know, because he wants the person asking questions to show that he or she understands what Richard is saying. Like this.
With some plants, you know, they're already in the country, so you can take cuttings or collect seed.
In that clip, Richard also used the word so. We use so to indicate that the things we are saying are connected. Richard uses so a number of times to connect the things he is saying and to show that they are all related to the questions he is answering. If you listen to native speakers' conversation, you'll hear these words often. You might also hear words like okay or right. It takes practice, but in time you'll be able to sound more natural by making them a part of your speech too. And that's all for Study English today. We've looked at using infinitives. And then we talked about conversation management markers and how to use them. For more practice on today's topics, go to the Study English website. It's at abcasiapacific.com/studyenglish. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Hello, I'm Margot Politis. Welcome to Study English IELTS preparation. The focus of today's lesson is the IELTS listening test. In the IELTS listening test, you will be tested on your ability to understand spoken English in a variety of contexts. So it's important to develop a range of skills that will help you with your listening. A good way to prepare for the test is to develop your previewing and predicting skills. These strategies will help improve your listening comprehension. Let's imagine this graphic is a written part of a listening test, a fact sheet. You are always given 30 seconds to familiarise yourself with the questions before the listening section is played. This is when you'll need to use your previewing and predicting skills. They will help you learn as much as possible before you listen, so you know what you will be listening to and what you need to listen for. Let's start previewing and predicting. Look at the section again. Think about the following questions. What is the topic? Who is speaking? Where are they? Why are they talking? Okay, let's think about the first question you should ask. What is the topic? We know from the title of the fact sheet that this section will be about health and well-being. Next, who is speaking? Because this is a section 3 of an IELTS listening test, we know that it will be a conversation between 2 to 4 speakers about an educational topic. The speakers could be teachers or students. Where are they? We could guess they are at university. Why are they talking? We know from the fact sheet that they are discussing a health study. These previewing and predicting skills are very important. You should go through these steps before the actual listening test begins, so you are properly prepared. It's important to look at the keywords in the questions to determine what kind of information you need to listen for. The keywords are highlighted. How many children are being tracked? We need to listen for a number. What are the researchers checking? We need to listen for something about the children's health. How old are the participants? We're listening for age. Another skill the listening test assesses is your ability to follow instructions correctly. If we look again at the written part of the test, what does the question ask us to do? To answer using no more than 3 words or a number. You must read and follow this instruction exactly. Remember that the listening test is played once only, so it is important to prepare yourself well. Let's listen now. The announcer would start off by saying something like, "You are going to hear a passage about a study on the health and well-being of children. Listen to the talk and complete the notes."
For the past 2 decades, scientists have been tracking the health and well-being of 7,500 Queensland children in a unique long-term study. It's rather like a scientific version of the documentary series 7 Up. Every few years, researchers revisit the participants to check their growth and record their thoughts on life. Now, those chosen to take part in the study as babies are coming of age, turning 21, and the data they're provided is giving valuable insights into just why some children are healthier than others.
Well done. Now let's move on. Now we're going to talk about listening for main ideas and supporting information. This is important to test your ability to identify and understand the relationship between ideas, such as comparisons, examples, facts, opinions, cause and effect. Here's an example. I'm going to give some information about sport. Identify what my main idea is and what information I provided to support my main idea. Sport provides numerous benefits. Participation in sport can have a positive effect on a person's well-being and at the same time improve their coordination. Also, it has been proven to help fight disease. One way your comprehension might be tested is with a summary completion test. Let's imagine this next graphic is part of a listening test where you have to complete the summary. Here's our 3-step strategy. Skim the summary to get a general understanding. While skimming, highlight the keywords in the sentences. Then think about the word form that is needed for each answer. Having skimmed the question, we know that it is about a scientific study on the health of young people. The keywords are young people, alcohol, drugs, data, things, happened, how. What is the word form we need in question 1? The study focused on young people who have on alcohol. Before the blank, we have a determiner, a, while the preposition on follows the blank. We need a noun. What word form do we need in question 2? After the pronoun she, he, which also functions as a subject, we need a verb. Look at the other verbs. The verbs pointed and happened in the sentence are in the past tense. We need a past tense verb. We have now prepared ourselves for this section of the listening test. Let's listen now. The announcer would start off by saying something like, "You are going to hear a professor talking about his investigation into the mental and physical health of young people. Listen to the talk and complete the summary."
For me, it's compelling. It's totally compelling. You look at someone at 21 who, say, has a dependence on alcohol or is using illicit drugs or has a serious mental illness or is violent and perhaps already in prison. And you look back through 21 years of that person's life, you've collected data periodically, and you look at the range of things that have happened to that person and the ways that person's responded.
Well done! If you practice your listening skills and strategies, you will be better prepared for the IELTS listening test. Always remember our 3-step strategy for summary completion tasks. Skim the summary to get a general understanding. Remember, a summary is a short presentation of what you hear. While skimming, highlight the keywords in the sentences. Choose the correct word form, noun, adjective, verb, adverb, that's needed. Remember, look before and after the blank space. The strategies for answering questions that test this skill are covered on our Study English website. Just go to abcasiapacific.com/studyenglish. That's all for today. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Hello, I'm Margot Politis. Welcome to Study English IELTS preparation. Have you ever wished you knew more words when you were reading or listening? Well, today we're going to show you how you can, just by guessing. It will take a little bit of effort, but you can learn strategies to help you guess the meaning of words you may not know. One of the strategies is using context to guess unknown words. But what is context? Well, context includes the words, phrases or sentences before and after the unknown word, which helps make the meaning clear. Let's consider an example. Today's story is about helping children learn to read. Here, Chris Brooks is using the phonics method. If you don't know what the phonics method is, can you work it out from the other words used by the reporter? Listen carefully.
Bay, beach, bead, beak.
Chris Brooks is teaching Ashley with what's called the phonics method, which was used by most teachers till the 50s. It breaks words down into their individual sounds.
Well, as you've seen, Sonia, what we've done is we've worked with some letters that have a variety of sounds. So the letter C had two sounds, the K sound and the S sound. And you can see they're colour coding, one's purple and one's black. And the same with the letter S, it has a S sound and a Z sound. So they're their common sounds.
The reporter uses the following words and phrases: teaching, phonics method, used by teachers, and breaks words down into their individual sounds. So we can guess that phonics is a method used by teachers that breaks words down into their individual sounds. So using the context, the words surrounding the word phonics, we have some understanding of it. Let's now listen to Chris Brooks again. What other words or phrases help us with the meaning of phonics?
Well, as you've seen, Sonia, what we've done is we've worked with some letters that have a variety of sounds. So the letter C had two sounds, the K sound and the S sound. And you can see they're colour coding, one's purple and one's black. And the same with the letter S, it has a S sound and a Z sound. So they're their common sounds.
Chris uses the phrases, some letters that have a variety of sounds. The letter C had two sounds, the K sound and the S sound. Colour coding. The letter S, a S sound and Z sound. So we can guess that the method focuses on letters that have a variety of sounds. For example, letter C, which has two sounds, K and S. We also know that colour coding is used to help recognise common sounds, and that the letter S has a S sound and Z sound. So we have quite a bit of information about phonics now. From the various contexts we've listened to, can you guess the meaning of the word phonics? How would you define it? Here's a possible guess. Phonics is a method that teaches people to read by learning to recognise the sounds that letters represent. Remember, you don't always need a dictionary to find the meaning of a word. Using the strategy of guessing the meaning of a word from the context helps with your ability to understand, partly because you stay focused on what you're listening to. It also helps build your vocabulary because you're more likely to remember the word. This skill is very helpful in the IELTS listening test because you won't have a dictionary to assist you. Here's a quick test to try out your skills. Can you guess the meaning of the highlighted words from the context? Statistics show that over 1/8 of the adult population in developing countries is illiterate. Governments have set up educational centres to teach this group to read and write. What does illiterate mean? We know that it's an educational matter related to teaching people to read and write, and that it's a large problem in developing countries. Illiterate would mean not able to read or write. Here's another one. John loved singing, so he auditioned for all the musicals. The directors liked the way he sang. What does auditioned mean? We know that John loves to sing, and he sang for directors, the people directing the musicals. So from this we can guess that auditioned means performed a song for directors to judge whether someone is good enough to be in their show. Okay, now we're going to have a look at the verb to be. To be usually functions as an auxiliary verb, but sometimes the verb to be can function as the main verb. That's when it links the subject and an expression that describes the subject. For example, look at this sentence. Chris is a phonics teacher. Is here is the main verb because it links the expression phonics teacher to the subject Chris. Okay, the reporter quotes children's author Mem Fox on literacy. What does she say about Australia's literacy rate?
Here is the scourge.
Internationally acclaimed children's author Mem Fox says the crisis is a myth and Australia's literacy rate is second only to Finland.
Mem Fox says the crisis is a myth. When the verb to be is used as the main verb in a sentence, what follows is called the complement. This complement defines the subject. The structure of these linking verb clauses or sentences is subject plus to be plus the complement. So we have the subject, the crisis, the linking verb, is, and the complement, a myth. The crisis is a myth. Listen to the clip again.
Here is the scourge.
Internationally acclaimed children's author Mem Fox says the crisis is a myth and Australia's literacy rate is second only to Finland.
Australia's literacy rate is second only to Finland. Let's look at the structure of the sentence. The subject is Australia's literacy rate. We have a form of the verb to be, is, and then the complement, second only to Finland. Second only to is an interesting expression that means, in this sentence, Australia has the second best literacy rate in the world. Finland is number 1. Let's look at another clip. Can you find another example where a complement is used?
She says we've achieved that by using a range of reading techniques, including phonics. But phonics alone isn't a magical cure for reading problems.
She says phonics isn't a magical cure. The subject is phonics. The verb to be, isn't, short for is not. And the complement, a magical cure. And that's all for today's Study English. Let's review what we've looked at. We've talked about looking at context to guess the meaning of words. And then we looked at using the verb to be to link subjects and their complements. Don't forget to visit our Study English website to find out more. It's at abcasiapacific.com/studyenglish. That's all for today. I'll see you next time for more IELTS preparation. Bye-bye.